It's Saturday, and welcome to another episode of PO Cubed, your chronological guide to Nintendo's handheld consoles. My name's DD Ash, and this week we're playing Puzznic, The Amazing Spider-Man, Paperboy, Ishido the Way of Stones, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Fall of the Foot Clan. Let's start the show. Puzznic DMG-PZA, developed and published by Taito Corporation. Released around the world on consoles from the NES to the PlayStation, on home computers from the Sharp X68000 to the FM Towns, Puzznic is a 1989 arcade tile-matching puzzle game. Strangely, the Game Boy release never escaped Japan. Quite often this would be because of the lack of a market, but surely this wasn't the case with Puzznic, as, like I say, it was otherwise pretty widespread. The aim of the game is to slide blocks about an enclosed grid, making matched sets. If 2, 3 or more blocks of the same design come into contact with each other, they disappear. You can move blocks left or right, regardless of whether they have anything on top of them, and they will descend gravitationally to the lowest available point. Now, of course, the blocks are not solely in pairs. There are frequently those in odd amounts, meaning you need to figure out how to get 3 of them to touch without losing them by touching 2. You can line them up in a row or make an L shape. When blocks are removed, ones on top will descend, allowing for chains to be made for higher points. It's a pretty weighty game. While not featuring quite the number of levels as some versions, there are 128 in total on the Game Boy, and even the early ones can take a few tries to get right. Thankfully, there are no lives to lose. Simply press start to reset the board and have another go. An attempt to overcome the lack of colour was made with the symbols that accompany a normal Puzznic game. But if this proves too hard to see, pressing select while in play emblazons a number on the blocks instead. This is functional, if a little soulless. This isn't a unique concept really. Block puzzle games were 10 a penny by the early 90s. Maybe that's why Puzznic never made it to the West. The market was already pretty saturated, what with Flipple, Tetris, Dr. Mario and so on. However, it uses the formula in a satisfying and quite addictive way, and password saves after each level means you can easily pick this up to fill a spare 10 minutes. No language barrier to overcome means it's worth an import, although I wouldn't say it's the cheapest title by any means. And it doesn't have the salacious eroge content that the arcade port had. But then, would you really want to look at nudes on a Game Boy? It's getting a little desperate. The Amazing Spider-Man DMG-SM, developed by Rare and published by LJN in North America and Nintendo in Europe. Internet memes are always fun, until they get stale, which is around a week or so, and the "how do I shot web" one has rarely been more appropriate. I consider myself reasonably good at video games. I'm no expert, but, well, when you own well over 2,000 retro games, including more than 1,000 Game Boy ones, you do learn a handful of skills that should theoretically be transferable between platforms and genres. But damn me, I can't figure out the controls in The Amazing Spider-Man. I think I figured out how to shot web. Pressing A to jump and then pressing A again in mid-air allows you to swing on the webs, but it doesn't always work. I think you need to be close to the top of the screen. In the comics, Spider-Man can shoot seemingly indefinitely long ropes, but here it appears the extra couple of feet makes all the difference. Sometimes it happens when you don't mean for it to. There's a part on the first level where Spider-Man becomes bamboozled by 2 crates stacked on top of one another. You can jump at that thing all you want, but he won't get past it. You need to sort of walk backwards and jump at an angle to encourage the guy to shoot his ropes up somehow. It takes ages. You apparently can fire a mess of webbing at enemies, but I can't get this to work at all. You can't run and attack at the same time, apart from this hard-to-use jump kick, meaning level progression is very much a stop-start affair. There's a straight punch and a crouching kick thing, but honestly, for a lot of the horizontal stages, you're better off jumping over as many enemies as you can, because you'll just take too much damage otherwise. Occasionally you'll come across a vertical wall climbing stage where people pop out of windows and swing baseball bats at you, and medicine balls drop out of the sky to knock you off. Well, they don't actually knock you off. Spider-Man clings on as long as he has some health left. Don't press anything on this stage though, because this will cause Peter Parker to let go of the wall and fall to his death. It baffles me why somebody would go to the trouble of programming in a suicide button. You're supposed to jump for a window right at the very end, but it's still stupid, and could have been used for some sort of blocking mechanism. Also, the attack button on this stage doesn't really work properly, so don't bother trying. A nice looking game that sounds pretty decent as well, and has some nice storyline and intermission cutscenes for each stage. However, the audio-visual presentation of a game was rarely LJN's downfall. The reason that games involving these guys so often have that notoriety for being bad is because the control systems don't work how they're supposed to. You can look in the manual if you like, but it doesn't help. The devs couldn't even explain how to play their own game, and sadly it renders The Amazing Spider-Man about as entertaining as a Spider-Man thread on 4chan.
Warning, such behavior is irresponsible, immature, and very foolish. We recommend you try it at home. Paperboy from Mindscape for your Nintendo Entertainment System.
Paperboy DMG-MP, developed by Tengen and published by Mindscape. Read all about it. The 80s arcade classic, which was ported to virtually every system at the time, found its way onto the Game Boy. You are the eponymous Paperboy, and with a constant forward motion along an isometric plane, are tasked with delivering papers to your subscribers by hurling them at their houses. You gain points for scoring a paper in their mailbox, but lose points if you smash their windows. Apparently, these papers are wrapped around bricks. Along the way, you have plenty of obstacles to avoid, such as mangy dogs, crazed motorists, runaway lawnmowers, and death. Over the course of a week, your aim is to convince the whole street to subscribe to you, while retaining current people by not missing them out. The NES version is vaunted for being an entertaining and wholly playable version of the arcade version. It sold really well, and can probably be considered a classic game on the system. However, the same is not true of the Game Boy version. This one is a direct port of the NES version, which brings with it a multitude of problems. When I say direct, this is literally a scaled down monochrome version of the same code from the NES game, which never really works. In fairness, a monochrome rendition of Paperboy was always going to be tough. Your subscribers' houses are different colours, so not having this at your disposal immediately makes your deliveries hard. Imagine how a postman would feel faced with a street taking all the numbers from their doors, and you've got it. Sure, subscribers are shaded slightly differently, but seeing as how you lose a lot of the visuals anyway due to the heavily cropped screen, you'll need to be a wizard to identify correct houses on the fly. With such a close perspective to your character, it's harder than it should be to avoid obstacles. Zooming out a little rather than cutting out so much of the play area would have been the logical solution. You barely get any reaction time, especially if you're on the road. Due to the random nature of the game, it's not even something you can learn. If you're in the road and a car appears, there's no way you're dodging it. In fact, I feel as though you still wouldn't have space to move even with the fastest reflexes. If you see it, you're hitting it. The Game Boy version of Paperboy stands as a great example of a recurring problem on the system. Sticking too closely to a home console blueprint and trying to shoehorn it into the little handheld was so often a surefire way of cocking up a classic franchise. Ishido, The Way of Stones, DMG-ST, developed by Nexoft and published by ASCII Corporation in Japan and Nexoft in North America. According to the cover art, the Way of Stones has something to do with Stonehenge. However, Ishido is clearly Japanese. It does sort of translate as the Way of Stones, but there's nothing ancient about this game. The whole background about the different cultures was just invented to create a mysticism surrounding the game. It certainly feels more akin to Mahjong or something than anything the Druidic Britons would have played. Anyway, don't worry about the spiel behind the game, it's not important. Whatever the title means, it sounds cool. However, it doesn't really give us a clue what the game's about, so if you were wondering, Ishido the Way of Stones is a board game. You have a 12 by 8 board, so 96 squares, upon which to place 72 stones. There are an assortment of stones, each being one of 6 shades and 6 designs, making 36 pairs. The aim is to place a randomly drawn stone on the board somewhere, next to one of the same shade or design. At the start of the game, there will be some stones already placed to start you off. The outermost space on each side of the play area is a darker shade, and placing a stone on here, while a legitimate move that follows the same rules, will give no points. You need to place your pieces in the lighter middle part. If you match a tile by shade or design on one side, you're awarded 1 point. You can match on multiple sides for more points. 2 sides gives 2 points, 3 sides gives 4, and 4 sides gives 8, as well as a ton of endgame bonuses. However, to make these multiple moves, you can't just line up stones of all the same colour or design, you have to mix and match. So for instance, to connect 2 sides, one of the adjacent tiles must match by design and the other by shade. For 3 sides, you need 2 of one and 1 of the other, and to match 4 sides at once, which is very hard, especially in 2-player mode, you need 2 matching shades and 2 matching designs. That's why you get so many points for it, and with the bonuses that increase exponentially the more you get, getting one in a head-to-head basically renders the contest moot. The 2-player mode is pretty good fun and can be done via link cable or turn-based. Playing against the CPU is a nice challenge. It's hard but quite winnable, unlike some board games on the Game Boy, and there's little computation time, the AI just gets on with it. The game's designed to be a solitaire game, certainly in the Mahjong family if not directly related to it. Single player has just as much longevity as 2 players, where the 4 side bonuses can really rack up, and because strategy will come into play much more here, they're more achievable as well. Musically, it's very pleasant, but obviously this isn't a genre you need a soundtrack for. It's perfectly alright to play on silent, and if you're playing a game like this, you're probably on a train or something anyway. Graphically, everything is clear and you get a choice of tile sets to use. There's not much else to tell you. If you like solitaire games, you can't go wrong with Ishido.
Dudes! Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Fall of the Foot Clan is gonna turn your Game Boy into a lean, green, fighting machine! With 5 new shell-shocking Shredder Zones, it's a good thing you have 4 turtlenecks to rest!
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Fall of the Foot Clan, DMG-NT, developed by Konami and published by Konami in Japan and Europe, and Ultra Games in North America. Many people remember Fall of the Foot Clan, and if they've not played it since childhood, they probably get warm fuzzies just by reading the title. I certainly did when it came to reviewing this. This just goes to show how obscuring nostalgia can be. Replaying this game gave a very different account than the one I would have written from memory alone. Something I didn't appreciate when I was 7 was just how good this game sounds. Featuring music by the astounding Michiru Yamane, later of Castlevania fame, Fall of the Foot Clan is an absolute joy to listen to. Pulsating music with the familiar cartoon motif is replaced in equal parts by driving high-tempo boss battles with progressive bass lines that wouldn't be out of place in Belmont's Revenge, and eerie, atmospheric tracks accompanying your trips into the sewers. Get this game for the music alone, because it's honestly one of the greatest on the whole system. The accompanying sound effects let it down a little though. They're sparsely used and only sound okay. The scenery is very well drawn too, with some nice background animations that Konami was very well versed in. There's very little flicker or slowdown at any point. It's a shame that the backgrounds are repeated so frequently. The nicest looking worlds get dull if you have to pass the same buildings or scaffolds time and time again. The sprites are detailed enough, and of a decent size, but again, there aren't many different ones. and there's little discernible difference between the 4 playable characters. The characters don't play any differently either, which is something even the first NES title managed. The game deserves a reasonable amount of credit for these 2 things, but sadly there's nothing else about it that warrants compliment. You walk very slowly from left to right, while flailing your weapon at the same enemy, called foot soldiers in the manual. You'll see millions of them, over and over again. They attack in the same pattern, 3 from the right and then 1 from behind, for example. Some hold pizza above their head for some reason. This can go on for 5 minutes with no variation in enemy, pattern or scenery. Just when you think the level must be looping, you'll find a boss. These look good, but are pretty tedious to fight. They only have 1 pattern. The game goes on and on like this. It's a good job the music is so great because there'd be no reason to carry on otherwise. If you manage to get to the last boss, it's an absolute joke. Just stand to the far left and it never hits you. Did nobody bring these points up at QC? Or did none of the testers bother to get that far? Between levels there is a bonus level which, somehow, manages to be even more boring than the main game. You need to collect these pizzas that appear for a short time, which replenish your health after the level. Having only 4 characters with 1 life each, you sadly need to do this, as they don't heal up after each stage. Throw in the cardinal sin of unavoidable damage, and you have yourself a really unappealing title here. If this wasn't a Ninja Turtles game, it probably would have been forgotten. It certainly wouldn't have sold nearly as well. Solid graphics and excellent music aside, don't let the decent score fool you too much. There's nothing radical about this one. Thanks for listening to the Portable Power Podcast. If you want to support the show, the best way to do so is on Patreon at patreon.com/portablepowerpodcast. Or subscribe on the YouTubes. We have daily uploads Monday to Friday, where you can watch me suck at the games as I talk about them. You can tweet me at POCubed or on any of the other socials you might expect. Thanks again and have a great weekend.